Welcome, SENS Talk.
Russell winds in, feeds it back across the strike, and scores! Brady Tkachuk makes it 2-0. Claude Giroux, hit alone, scores!
Tim Stutzel across, Tkachuk score! The captain, Brady Tkachuk, buries it with 1:18 to go.
See you later. Go, SENS, go.
Welcome to SENS Talk. My name is Brandon Plant, and I am your host. We have a lot of news to break down today. Never a quiet or dull day in SENS land, but I guess we'll start off with the news that really made the rest of the events today transpire. And basically for this video, I'm going to go over the ruling by the National Hockey League over the Evgenii Dadonov trade fiasco, and then of course the resigning or the firing, however you want to frame it, to the Senator General Manager Pierre Dorion that transpired, of course, after the ruling was announced. Today is definitely one of the craziest days in SENS history. A confusing day, but a day that the franchise ultimately has changed. For the better or for the worse is for you to decide. But the franchise absolutely has changed after the events of today. So let's get into it. So, as I mentioned in my last video, it's been a few days since, the National Hockey League was investigating the Ottawa Senators for their role in the Evgenii Dadonov trade fiasco. Now, if you don't know what happened, essentially, Vegas was trying to trade Dadonov to Anaheim to relieve some cap space. They asked the Ottawa Senators if he had a no-trade clause. Now, according to Frank Cervelli, Pierre Dorion, who was on the call alone apparently, said no, which means that, they were able to ship off Dadonov to Anaheim with no issue. Of course, that was not the case. Dadonov did have a 10-team no-trade list, and of course, Anaheim was on that list. Ultimately, the National Hockey League nulled the trade, and Vegas was left embarrassed. Now, we were told about a year ago that this was a non-factor for the Senators. They were cleared of any wrongdoing, but apparently Vegas was pushing over the last year for the National Hockey League to impose a punishment on the Ottawa Senators because they didn't like how that situation unfolded. They felt embarrassed. And ultimately, the Ottawa Senators are being penalized for this situation. Now, look, the penalty itself is an utter disgrace. Take this in for a second. Take this in. The Ottawa Senators are being fined more, far more, than the Chicago Blackhawks were for covering up sexual assault to a player within the organization. Take that in for a second. Think about it. The National Hockey League, for some reason, is far more upset about an error in bureaucracy that, frankly, the National Hockey League should be taking care of anyways. There should be a central registry for no trade clauses. That's besides the point. So, the National Hockey League cares more about that than they do about sexual assault to players on teams in their league. That is disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. The fact that Chicago was only fined $2 million and got a generational player the same year is an absolute disgrace and a slap in the face for the Senators and for everyone involved in the Kyle Beach situation, in the Hockey Canada situation. It's an utter disgrace. And once again, the National Hockey League's hypocrisy is in wide range for anyone to see clearly. Now moving on, because look, I can go on all day about this, but look, at the end of the day, Pierre Dorion messed up. He shouldn't have said no to the Vegas Golden Knights, regardless of whether or not the information was available, which it was publicly for anyone to look at. I could have checked Cat Friendly. Kelly McCrimmon for Vegas could have checked Cat Friendly and saw that Dadonov had a no-trade list. Regardless, it is Pierre Dorion's fault that he said no and that Vegas went on with the trade. So ultimately, it is Pierre Dorion's fault. Whether it was a mistake or just straight negligence, we're not too sure about right now. But regardless, ultimately, this is a mistake by the Senator General Manager, and he obviously got punished for it. And there should be a penalty for a mistake like this, don't get me wrong. But being fined more or being punished far more than a team was for covering up sexual assault, it's disgraceful. And it says all you need to know about the National Hockey League when it comes to things like this. We saw it with the hypocrisy with Shane Pinto earlier this week when he was suspended for gambling. And look, he broke the rules, don't get me wrong, I understand that. But Michael Andlauer mentioned this in his press conference today. The hypocrisy of the National Hockey League to suspend a guy for gambling as they push gambling on children every single game is absolutely bewildering. So once again, the National Hockey League's hypocrisy is on full display. And that's not me being biased. That is the opinion of a lot of people around the National Hockey League that are not Senator fans. Because once again, the fact that this Dadonov ordeal has resulted in a more harsh penalty than an organization covering up sexual assault to a player within that organization is a disgrace. Absolute disgrace. And look, that doesn't take any of the blame away from Pierre Dorion. He should be absolutely held accountable for such a stupid mistake, regardless, once again, if it was negligence or on purpose. But the severity of the penalty is outstanding in the worst way possible. Just absolutely bewildering. But of course, look, this is where we're going to move on to the next part of the video because, as you probably know by now, it was announced just about 30 minutes ago officially, Pierre Dorion is no longer the Senator General Manager. After just under 8 years at the helm, he officially resigned, but on Tuesday last night, him and Senator owner Michael Andlauer had dinner, and Andlauer essentially told him, look, we're going to fire you or you can resign, but the time's up. It's done. You made a mistake. We can't have it. We need to have accountability. Andlauer's been preaching accountability since coming here, and here's a good example of that accountability being put into fruition. Now, I will say this. I think the National Hockey League might lighten the sentencing, especially with Pierre Dorion now being let go. Since Andlauer is a new owner, just bought the team, was not the owner or the leader of the organization when all this went down, the National Hockey League might lighten the penalty, and they've done this in the past before. They did this for the New Jersey Devils back in 2014 for their 17-year cap circumvention contract with Ilya Kovalchuk. That was a situation where a new ownership group came in as well to the Devils before that fiasco took place, and then the National Hockey League ultimately a couple years later would soften their penalty, and I think there's a very good chance that happens again with this scenario, especially since the Ottawa Senators can pick whether the first round pick they lose is in 2024, 2025, or 2026. So I think this year they have 2 first rounders. Maybe there's a chance that they ultimately would like to give up one of those since they'll already have a first rounder. I would think, or what I would do anyways, is I would hold on to that pick until next year or 2026 at the latest. See if the National Hockey League might even lighten the penalty. But more so, at that point, you should be in the playoffs. It should be a late round pick anyways. But it is interesting to note that the Sens do have the option of picking when the first round pick is forfeited. So not necessarily this year. It could be next year or 2026. But within the next 3 years, if this penalty is held for the next 3 years, they will be losing a first round pick. Now, as I mentioned, there was a press conference today with Steve Staios and Michael Andlauer to break down the situation of the Dadonov trade fiasco, Pierre Dorion being let go, and of course, they also mentioned the Shane Pinto gambling suspension for 41 games. And I'm going to go through some key quotes from this press conference from Andlauer and Steve Staios because a lot of interesting and juicy things were said. And notably, Andlauer obviously was frustrated and as well confused as to why the National Hockey League dropped this bomb on the organization only after the sale was complete. Look, in the last week, the Sens have been hit with 2 massive penalties by the National Hockey League. Of course, Shane Pinto breaking gambling rule or policy, getting suspended for 41 games, essentially being used to set an example for the rest of the National Hockey League. And then, of course, with this Dadonov thing, Andlauer specifically mentioned in the press conference that him and fellow bidders for the organization before the sale was complete did not view the Dadonov situation whatsoever as area of concern for them. So the fact this kind of came out of nowhere has been very frustrating for Michael Andlauer, and he made that clear in the press conference. Here are some key quotes. I will mention this right off the bat. He did take responsibility on behalf of the organization for the Dadonov situation, which I think is very commendable for the Senator owner, especially since, once again, it very clearly looks to be solely on Pierre Dorion's shoulders. He took the call alone, reportedly, and most importantly, the onus is on Pierre Dorion to give the proper information. Regardless of the severity of the penalty or the process itself, the onus is on Pierre Dorion to do what he's supposed to do, which is tell Vegas the accurate information. He did not. It's a fireable offense. It's why he got fired or resigned. And Andlauer took full responsibility for that, saying today that the 73-page report that the National Hockey League shared with me this week, that being Andlauer, showed that the actions were negligent in nature by our hockey club. This set off events that embarrassed the league and pissed off 2 hockey clubs. So he takes full responsibility there, of course, by saying it was by his hockey club, the negligent action. And more importantly, obviously the league and the 2 hockey clubs were very embarrassed about the situation. But he also mentioned specifically about the hypocrisy around the National Hockey League in terms of gambling and Shane Pinto and that whole situation. And more so, once again, kind of called out Gary Bettman for for lack of a better word, scumminess around this whole situation, because once again, he wasn't made aware of the Pinto or Dadonov situation up until maybe a month ago or less. And keep in mind, he only bought the SENS just over a month ago. So understandably, Andlauer kind of feels probably pissed off about how this has been taken care of, because once again, this investigation on Dadonov has been going on for a little bit of time. The Senators ultimately were penalized, but it did look like they were in the clear. As I mentioned, last year the Senators were given the all clear by the National Hockey League. And then, of course, in the Shane Pinto situation, we all know the Sens weren't made aware of the Pinto investigation until a few weeks ago, when we all know that that investigation was going on back in the summer. So Andlauer, understandably, is upset and feels that, obviously, and he mentioned this specifically, that the National Hockey League didn't mention anything to the bidders and, of course, to Andlauer until the sale was finalized, to keep the price of the organization at the highest rate possible. Which makes sense in a business standpoint for Gary Bettman in the NHL. That doesn't mean it's still not scummy. It's very scummy, don't get me wrong. Now, Andlauer took some shots at the National Hockey League, more so than that, very specifically calling them out on the hypocrisy around gambling and the young players and the influence it has on young people watching the game itself. Once again, there's a lot of hypocrisy that can be said about suspending a player for 41 games for not even betting on NHL games while he wears a sponsor on his helmet from a gambling company, or in between periods, or on the benches, or on the boards, or anywhere. There's gambling ads 24/7. The hypocrisy is unbelievable. And Andlauer said this: you look at a young man, being Shane Pinto, who's making millions of dollars and representing the community, but he's 21 years old. Wayne Gretzky goes on MGM on TV and talks about betting. Think about being injured, having time on your hands and a cell phone, and seeing all of that. Michael Andlauer essentially is calling out the National Hockey League for the hypocrisy. If you care so much about gambling and ensuring the ethicalness of all of the, the gambling side of things with players in the league, then what is this? I completely understand his frustration with that as well. And once again, I'm going on in circles here, but it's just incredibly hypocritical, this entire situation by the National Hockey League on two fronts. One, with gambling, they take millions and frankly billions of dollars from these gambling companies, and then they suspend Shane Pinto for not even betting on NHL games and use him as an example. And then with the Dadonov situation, once again, ultimately it was Pierre Dorion's fault. You just can't do that. Absolutely understand why the Senators are being fined somewhat or being penalized for this situation, especially since Vegas pushed for it for over a year, which I have my own feelings about, but regardless, I can understand the penalty. But the severity of the penalty, considering the lackluster penalizations the NHL has given to far more egregious acts of violations of the CBA or just the law in general, cough, cough, Chicago, yeah, it's going to piss me off. It's going to probably piss you off, and absolutely will piss off Michael Andlauer. So I understand why he came out fiery in this press conference. I don't blame him whatsoever. Now, as I've been reporting for months, Peter Chiarelli has been involved with Michael Andlauer since the bidding. I've been reporting this for months. He's been helping Andlauer in an advisory role for hockey operations. Now, does that mean Peter Chiarelli will be brought in officially? We got our answer today. As I tweeted out 30 or 40 minutes before the press conference, I had no source confirm to me that Peter Chiarelli was going to be named the next Senator General Manager. Now, I'm not saying that won't happen down the line, as I mentioned in my report before the press conference, but just because Peter Chiarelli has been helping out the Ottawa Senator in an advisory role, in an unofficial capacity, I might add, that does not mean that Peter Chiarelli will be named the next Senator General Manager, and we got confirmation of that today in the press conference. Now, I do want to note, as you can see on your screen right now, about 30 or 40 minutes before the press conference, I tweeted out saying that Peter Chiarelli down the line might absolutely be the next Senator General Manager, but I would expect, and this is what's going to happen, Steve Staios would become the interim General Manager, and down the line, probably in the offseason, a proper search will be conducted to find the next General Manager of the Ottawa Senators. Once again, will Peter Chiarelli be the next Sens GM? It's definitely still possible, just not right now. And Steve Staios, the president of hockey operations for the Ottawa Senators, in the press conference mentioned, I'll do what's best for the Ottawa Senators. So as this begins to unfold, we'll take a longer look at what our options might be and who may be available. That's basically hinting that this is not going to be something anytime soon. Stay tuned though, likely in the off season. That's what I would expect. That hasn't been confirmed by any sources, but that's just a hunch I'm getting based off what I've been hearing over the last couple of weeks, especially when the Pierre Dorion, Peter Chiarelli stuff really started to pick up. But once again, I've been reporting on this for the last few months. Peter Chiarelli at some point will be brought into the SENS organization. Will that be as GM? Possibly, but he will be brought in at some point, in my opinion. He's been working very closely with Michael Andlauer, once again, in an unofficial capacity. Now, besides that, I'll leave it there. I want to wish the best to Pierre Dorion. I'll just say this. I'm not trying to crucify the guy of this video. I wish Pierre Dorion the best. We have to remember he built this core. So many young, talented players were brought in under Pierre Dorion's nearly 8-year tenure. We can't forget that. He built this core that's giving us the best chance to win a Stanley Cup in almost 2 decades. So for that, thank you, Pierre Dorion, and I wish you the best of luck, of course. But, the consistent miscommunications and drama around this organization when you were the leader of the organization shows that we need a change, and it's probably best for both sides to move on. So I wish Pierre Dorion the best of luck. I have respect for him and his hockey ability at times. He's hit or miss in times, in my opinion, but he did a very good job assembling a fantastic core here. I'm sure he'll find some sort of NHL role somewhere else. He has a great scouting mind, but this was probably the best situation for the SENS organization and for Pierre Dorion. It just made sense to move on, especially after something like this dropped. So besides that, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Just a crazy day in SENS land as usual. I have so many things to say about this, and I can go on for hours about it. But essentially, I understand the National Hockey League penalizing the SENS for what they did, or what Pierre Dorion did with the Dadonov trade fiasco, but the hypocrisy is still outstanding and in the worst way possible. Besides that, thank you all for watching. I'll see you tomorrow when Cam Talbot returns to Ottawa as Ottawa takes on the Los Angeles Kings. Should be an interesting one, but yeah, just an interesting day here in SENS land, and that's a nice way of putting it. It's never a dull day here, let me just say that. And, it's a new era in SENS history. That's why I mentioned that at the beginning of the video. It's a new era for the Ottawa Senator franchise, and now the SENS can truly be the best in class. I'll see you all soon. Go SENS, go.